You actually believe that nonsense? The activist's voice cut through the air, dripping with mockery. The crowd, gathered in the heart of the bustling city square, fell silent. Across from him stood a man, calm, unwavering. A Trump supporter, proudly wearing a red cap, his hands steady at his sides. He wasn't here for a fight, but he wasn't about to back down either. The activist smirked, taking a step closer. "Tell me," he sneered, "how can you support a man like that? How can you stand there and pretend you're not part of the problem?" Phones went up. Cameras flashed. This was a moment built for the internet, a classic showdown. The activist had come prepared, expecting hesitation, expecting shame. But instead, the Trump supporter did something no one saw coming. He smiled, and then, in a voice clear enough to cut through the tension, he said something that made the entire crowd freeze. "You assume I follow blindly. But let me ask you this. Have you ever questioned your own beliefs?" The activist blinked. The audience leaned in. And just like that, the confrontation took a turn no one expected. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. Mark Reynolds had spent years standing firm in his beliefs, despite the backlash, the mockery, and the labels thrown his way. A small business owner from Ohio, he believed in hard work, personal responsibility, and the right to speak one's mind, even when it wasn't the popular opinion. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply stood his ground. But today was different. The event had started as a peaceful political gathering, supporters listening to speeches, engaging in discussion. That was until Jason Carter arrived. A well-known activist with a strong online following, Jason thrived on public confrontations. To him, Trump supporters weren't just political opponents, they were the enemy. His goal: expose them, humiliate them, crush them in a battle of wits and moral superiority. And now, Mark was his latest target. The cameras were rolling. Jason knew how to play this game. Paint the opposition as ignorant. Force them to stumble. Watch them crumble under pressure. He had done it before. And with Mark standing in front of him, dressed in his everyday work clothes, his MAGA cap resting comfortably on his head, Jason was confident that this would be yet another easy takedown. "Tell me, Mark," Jason said, his voice dripping with condescension. "What exactly is it that makes you think Trump is so great? Or do you just repeat whatever Fox News tells you?" Laughter rippled through Jason's supporters. The bait was set. The crowd waited, expecting Mark to fumble, to get defensive, to lash out. But he didn't. Instead, he took a deep breath, looked Jason straight in the eyes, and prepared to respond in a way that no one was expecting. Jason smirked, waiting for Mark to stumble over his words, to fumble through a defense, or, better yet, to say something that could be twisted into a viral gotcha moment. The cameras were trained on them, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. A few people in the back whispered to each other, grinning, already certain of how this would play out. Mark, however, didn't take the bait. He adjusted his cap slightly, his expression unreadable. Instead of rushing to respond, he let the moment breathe, letting Jason's words hang in the air for just a second longer than expected. The confidence in Jason's smirk flickered, just briefly, as if realizing that his opponent might not be as easy to dismantle as he had assumed. "Come on, Mark," Jason pressed, his tone still playful but now tinged with impatience. "Give us one good reason why a working-class guy like you would support a billionaire who, let's be honest, doesn't even know you exist." More laughter. A few scattered claps from Jason's supporters. Someone in the back called out, "Yeah, tell us, Mark." Mark finally spoke, but instead of a rushed, defensive response, his voice was calm, even measured. "You know what's funny," he said, glancing around at the audience before turning back to Jason. "Every time someone like me supports someone like Trump, people like you think we've been tricked. That we're too dumb to think for ourselves. That we're just parroting talking points." The crowd quieted slightly. Jason still had his smirk, but it wasn't quite as wide now. "But let me ask you this," Mark continued. "Have you ever once stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, we support him because we actually believe in something? That maybe we see a country where small businesses don't get crushed under endless regulations, where people can speak their minds without fear of being canceled, where working-class Americans aren't treated like the enemy?" The shift in the atmosphere was subtle but undeniable. The smirks weren't as broad anymore. Some of the laughter had died down. Even Jason's supporters, while still eager to see how this played out. We're actually listening now. But Jason wasn't done yet. He folded his arms, shaking his head. All right, Mark, let's talk about that. You say you want free speech, but what about all the things Trump has said? The so-called dangerous rhetoric? You guys love to talk about free speech until someone says something you don't like. Hypocrisy much. A few claps. A couple of cheers. Jason's confidence returned, and he took a small step forward, sensing an opportunity to regain control of the conversation. So tell me, he pressed, is there anything Trump could say that you'd actually disagree with? Or are you just going to keep defending him no matter what? Mark didn't waver. He simply tilted his head slightly, as if studying Jason, not with anger, not with frustration, but with something else entirely. Something closer to curiosity. And then he responded, not with outrage, not with defensiveness, but with something far more powerful. Mark let the silence stretch for just a beat longer than expected. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, the expectation that he would fumble, get flustered, or lash out. Instead, he exhaled slowly, then smiled. Not a smirk, not an angry grin, but a knowing, almost amused smile. Jason, let me ask you something, he said, his tone calm, conversational. Do you believe in free speech? Jason scoffed, arms still crossed. Of course I do. Mark nodded, as if he had expected that answer. So if you truly believe in free speech, why is it that every time someone like me speaks up, people like you try to shame us? Try to silence us? Try to cancel us? Jason's smirk twitched, a flicker of uncertainty. Mark continued, his voice steady. See, here's the difference between us. You think free speech means only your side gets to talk. But real free speech, it means we can disagree, debate, and still walk away without trying to destroy each other. The audience was shifting now, sensing the momentum change. Even some of Jason's supporters seemed to be reconsidering their stance. And as for Trump, Mark shrugged. I don't worship politicians, Jason. Unlike the people who scream, trust the experts every time the government tells them something, I don't put blind faith in anyone. Not Trump, not Biden, not any politician. But I support the man because I've seen what the alternative looks like. I've seen jobs disappear, businesses shut down, and everyday Americans treated like villains just because they don't agree with the latest woke narrative. Jason opened his mouth to respond, but Mark wasn't finished. You asked if there's anything Trump could say that I disagree with? Of course there is. I don't have to agree with every tweet or every speech to recognize that, under his policies, working-class people were better off than they are now. And that's the problem with people like you. You think supporting someone means blind loyalty because that's how it works in your world. But in mine, we think for ourselves. The silence that followed was thick, electric. Jason, for the first time, looked genuinely caught off guard. The audience, initially amused by the exchange, was now hanging on every word. And just like that, the narrative had flipped. Jason had walked into this confrontation expecting an easy win. Instead, he had been met with calm, unwavering confidence, a response so unexpected, so undeniable, that even those who had laughed at Mark just moments ago were now seeing him in a different light. Jason shifted uncomfortably. The smug confidence he had walked in with was gone, replaced by something else. Uncertainty, maybe even frustration. He had come expecting an easy battle, a simple takedown of a so-called ignorant Trump supporter. Instead, he found himself outmatched, not in volume, not in aggression, but in something far more powerful, unwavering conviction. Mark let the silence hang, watching Jason fumble for a response. The audience was waiting too, but the energy in the room had changed. A few moments ago, laughter and jeers had filled the space, people entertained by the confrontation. But now, people were leaning in, thinking, processing. Jason opened his mouth, but no words came. His arguments, so carefully rehearsed, felt hollow now. He had accused Mark of blind loyalty, but Mark had turned the mirror back on him. The real question wasn't about Trump. It wasn't about politics at all. It was about something much bigger, the right to think freely, to question narratives, to stand by your beliefs without fear. And the truth was, Jason wasn't ready for that conversation. Mark took a small step forward, lowering his voice, but somehow making it even more powerful. "You know what the real difference between us is, Jason?" He paused, letting the moment sink in. "I'm not afraid of your opinions. You, on the other hand, you're terrified of mine." A hush fell over the crowd. Even those who had been on Jason's side moments ago couldn't deny the weight of that statement. Because it was true. People like Jason, loud, aggressive, self-righteous, they weren't fighting for equality or justice. They were fighting for control. Control over the narrative. Control over speech. Control over who gets to speak and who is silenced. And for the first time, Jason wasn't the one controlling the moment. Mark took a slow breath, glancing around the crowd. "See, this isn't about Trump. It never was. This is about something much bigger. It's about whether we're allowed to think for ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather stand alone with the truth than be part of a crowd built on lies." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some people nodded. Others glanced around, as if seeing the situation through a new lens. Jason clenched his jaw, but there was no more fire in his eyes. No comeback. No smug retort. Because deep down, even he knew he had lost. Mark didn't need applause, but it came anyway. A slow build at first, then a wave of claps and cheers that filled the space. It wasn't the reaction Jason had expected when he first confronted Mark, but it was the one that now felt inevitable. Because the truth had a way of cutting through the noise. As Mark turned to leave, he caught Jason's eye one last time. Not with anger, not with mockery, but with something even more powerful. Pity. Because Jason, for all his bravado, wasn't fighting for justice. He was fighting to hold on to a narrative that was slipping through his fingers. And Mark had just shown everyone why,